Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nolene Padiachi Raghunandan, and I'm the Practice Head for Climate Change at Six Capital's ESG Advisory. I'd like to warmly welcome you to today's webinar. This is our third and final segment of our three-part climate webinar series. And today's webinar is all about climate finance and unlocking green investment for climate action. We've got a very insightful agenda planned for you today, and I do hope you enjoy it and you leave today's session with a better understanding of financing climate action. Today we have two speakers lined up for you who's going to be presenting today's topics. First, we have Lisa Custis. Lisa is a senior ESG advisor within our advisory practice. Lisa holds a BCom honors degree in investment management, a certificate in ESG investing from the CFA Institute, and a master's degree in climate change finance and investment. Lisa started her career working in asset management in various roles, including fund manager research, business development, and equity research. Since 2018, Lisa has specialized in consulting, working with both investors and corporates on their sustainability journey. Secondly, we have Sunal Nokia. Sunal is the practice head for the ESG advisory practice at Six Capitals. Sunal holds a bachelor's of engineering degree in chemical engineering and specializes in sustainability and climate change advisory. Sunal has in-depth knowledge and experience in developing greenhouse gas emission reduction projects, developing carbon offset projects, calculating carbon footprints, performing life cycle assessments, quantifying supply chain emissions, as well as developing carbon calculators and carbon neutral roadmaps. Sunal also assists clients with their carbon tax responsibilities. Before I hand over to Lisa and Sunal, we have a quick poll for you. You should be seeing a poll appear on your screens now. The question is, how familiar are you with climate finance? So if you could just take a second to select the answer that's most relevant to you. I'd also like to let you know that we do have a Q&A function on this platform where you can post any questions you may have. We will do our best to reply to your questions during this webinar, or we'll get back to you after the session if we run out of time. The webinar will be recorded and shared with you after the session as well. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Lisa.
Thank you, Nolene. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining today's session. Today, we'll be exploring the key themes shaping climate finance and its role in driving a low-carbon, resilient economy. We'll start with an introduction to climate finance, what it is and why it matters. Then we'll look at the different types of investors and instruments, taking a deeper look into debt and equity instruments. We'll also examine the barriers and the benefits of climate finance. And I will then hand over to Sunal, who will talk about the Section 12L tax incentive for energy efficiency savings. Let's kick off by talking about what green and climate finance are. It is helpful to see where these definitions sit within the broader range of sustainable finance. Sustainable finance is the broadest concept. It's finance that takes into account not just environmental issues, but also social and governance factors too. Within the broad umbrella of sustainable finance, we have green finance. And green finance focuses specifically on the environmental dimension. Green finance is the use of financial instruments and investments that deliberately channel capital into projects or companies that minimize environmental harm or deliver positive environmental outcomes while still maintaining financial returns for investors. So think about investments in renewable energy like solar and wind farms, or in sustainable agriculture and clean transportation. The range of projects is extensive, but we'll dive deeper into those a little later in this webinar. Finally, within green finance, we have climate finance. Climate finance is included within the wider category of green finance, but it has a specific agenda. It includes all financial flows from governments, private investors, and multilateral institutions that are dedicated to addressing climate change, both mitigation and adaptation. Climate finance goes beyond just environmental responsibility. It's about bringing sustainability and strong financial performance together. In this way, it becomes a powerful tool to achieve two critical goals: protecting our planet and generating solid financial returns for investors. From the environmental perspective, climate finance reduces carbon emissions, therefore contributing to a lower carbon economy, and this is referred to as climate mitigation. It builds resilience, enabling communities, businesses, and economies to better withstand environmental and climate-related risks. This is referred to as climate adaptation. And it supports global sustainability goals, including the Sustainable Development Goals, international climate commitments such as the Paris Agreement, and local climate targets. From an investor's perspective, climate finance delivers competitive returns while managing risk. And risk management here isn't just about volatility. It's also about avoiding stranded assets like coal plants or other carbon-intensive investments that may lose value as the world transitions to clean energy. It unlocks new industries and opportunities, such as clean technologies and sustainable agriculture, creating long-term growth potential. And finally, it benefits from strong policy and incentive alignment, with governments backing climate action through tax breaks, subsidies, and other supportive measures. I want to touch on some of the global sustainability frameworks that I've just made reference to in the previous slide. Climate finance operates within international frameworks that guide the flow of capital towards a low carbon and climate resilient future. Let's start with the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement is the cornerstone of global climate action. It matters because nearly every country in the world committed to a shared goal: keeping global warming well below 2 degrees Celsius and ideally limiting it to 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels. As part of this agreement, countries must submit their own climate pledges called nationally determined contributions and report progress every 5 years through a global stocktake. And as one of the world's most carbon-intensive economies, South Africa is committed to reducing emissions in line with its nationally determined contribution under the Paris Agreement. But finance is central to this too. Article 2.1c of the Paris Agreement calls for aligning global financial flows with low-emission, climate-resilient development. It therefore means shifting investments away from high-carbon activities towards sustainable, climate-friendly solutions. We also have the Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs. And although the SDGs are a framework and not an international commitment, they are also very important and interconnected with the Paris Agreement. All UN member states adopted the SDGs in 2015. And KPMG research shows that 74% of the world's biggest companies now reference the SDGs in their sustainability reporting. The SDGs provide a global framework for measuring impact and accountability, ensuring that progress on sustainability goals is tracked and reported on. They are broader than the Paris Agreement. The goals cover 17 areas across environmental, social, and economic dimensions. However, several of them intersect with the climate agenda over and above SDG 13, which is climate action. And I've highlighted some of those SDGs on the slide. Why does this matter? The Paris Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals are not only global frameworks and commitments, they actively shape South Africa's operating environment. They influence national policy, they guide investor priorities, where capital increasingly flows to low-carbon sustainable projects, and they drive regulatory changes, such as carbon taxes. Together, they play a role in setting the direction for South Africa's economy and influence how businesses need to adapt to stay competitive. Let's take a look at the current state of climate finance globally. According to the Climate Policy Initiative, climate finance hit an all-time high in 2023, reaching $1.9 trillion US. This is very much swayed towards climate mitigation, which we will touch on later in this webinar. Public finance has been the backbone of climate action. However, private finance is scaling rapidly, and it's now a central driver of global climate investment. This is, however, region dependent. As you can see from the graph on the right, regions such as the US and Canada have significant private climate investment. However, regions including Africa remain a challenge. Private investment is critical to closing Africa's climate finance gap, but so far it remains limited. In Africa, private climate finance has been growing, but despite that growth, private finance still represents only 18% of total climate flows on the continent. That's the lowest share of private investment in any region worldwide. Underdeveloped capital markets, weak regulatory frameworks, and high perceived risks make it difficult to attract investment. And added to this, there aren't enough bankable projects ready for investment, and capital costs remain high. Public and private investors also have different objectives and play different roles. Public finance is essential where markets fall short, funding adaptation, early stage innovation, and providing concessional loans or grants to de-risk projects. Private finance seeks risk-adjusted returns, but increasingly demands alignment with ESG and climate goals. It flows into bankable, revenue-generating projects like renewables and green infrastructure. Climate finance relies on a wide range of actors within the categories of public and private investors. This slide provides a more granular breakdown of the various entities that fall within these categories. The left-hand side shows the public investors, which are the governments, development finance institutions, and the climate funds that these investors set up to allocate capital to climate-related projects or investments. On the right-hand side are the private investors. These include the commercial financial institutions, individual or retail investors, and companies. According to the Climate Policy Initiative's report on the global landscape of climate finance, contributions from private finance exceeded $1 trillion for the first time in 2023. Let's take a closer look at public and private investors and the different mechanisms for finance. Public investors, such as governments and development banks, are at the forefront of climate finance. They play a catalytic role in unlocking large-scale financing and ensuring financial flows are directed towards low-carbon, climate-resilient development. Public investors use a range of financial mechanisms to drive climate finance. Three of the most important are concessional loans, grants, and dedicated funds. This type of funding also unlocks much larger volumes of private capital and ensure that money flows where it is most urgently needed. First, there are concessional loans. These are loans offered at below market interest rates, often with longer repayment periods. They're designed to make capital-intensive climate projects more affordable and more attractive to governments and private partners. Then we have grants. Grants provide direct financial support without the expectation of repayment. They are especially important for early-stage projects, capacity building, and adaptation initiatives that may not generate immediate financial returns, but deliver huge environmental benefits. And third, we have climate funds. Public investors set up or contribute to climate funds, such as the Green Climate Fund, that pool resources and channel them into priority areas. The Green Climate Fund, for example, is the world's largest dedicated climate fund. It was created under the UN Climate Convention to support developing countries. And its mission is to help them finance both adaptation to climate impacts and mitigation of emissions. These funds often blend public and private capital, creating larger pools of finance and reducing risks for commercial investors. These public institutions bring several advantages to the table. For example, development banks mobilize capital at scale, blending public and private funds to channel investments into climate projects. They de-risk green investments through blended finance. They offer concessional long-term financing And finally, they build capacity, providing technical support and knowledge sharing to strengthen local institutions, businesses, and governments. On the private side, there are many different types of investors involved in climate finance. Let's start with institutional investors, private equity, and venture capital funds. Institutional investors are large investors such as pension funds. These entities manage trillions in assets on behalf of others. Private equity firms raise capital from large investors to acquire holdings in projects or companies, while venture capital funds back early-stage startups with high growth potential. All three groups are increasingly directing capital towards clean technologies, renewable energy, and climate-smart solutions. Their involvement is critical for scaling innovation and accelerating the commercialization of climate-friendly industries. Impact investors fall within these categories of investors, and they look for measurable environmental benefits alongside financial returns, making sure that capital goes to projects with the highest sustainability value. Commercial banks act as intermediaries, channeling capital into green projects through lending, sustainable bonds, and blended finance structures, and they help bridge short and long-term capital needs while embedding climate risk into their decision-making. Companies are not only recipients of climate finance, but also providers. By investing in their own decarbonization, whether it's energy efficiency or green supply chains, companies redirect financial flows towards sustainable outcomes. And finally, we have individuals or retail investors, and they make sustainable investment choices, whether it's buying green bonds, choosing climate-focused funds, or allocating savings into ESG portfolios. Climate finance is delivered through a range of financial instruments, each offering their own risk return and impact profiles based on the nature of the instrument. First, we have bonds. One of the most widely used instruments in sustainable finance is the green bond. These are forms of debt specifically allocated to climate-related or environmentally sustainable projects. They allow investors to back renewable energy, energy efficiency, or sustainable infrastructure, all while receiving predictable financial returns. Then we have equity. Equity financing involves taking an ownership stake in climate-related companies or projects. By doing so, investors share both the risks and the potential returns. Next, we have blended finance. As I mentioned earlier, blended finance combines public concessional funds with private capital to make projects more attractive to investors. By de-risking investments through mechanisms like first loss tranches or co-investments, blended finance helps scale climate finance in areas that may otherwise be perceived as too risky. And finally, we have carbon markets. Carbon markets create financial incentives for emission reductions by enabling the trading of carbon credits. Companies or governments that reduce emissions beyond their targets can sell credits, while others can purchase them to meet compliance or voluntary commitments. These markets channel finance toward projects that cut emissions and promote sustainability. Let's take a closer look into some of these instruments, starting with debt. Globally, the vast majority of climate finance, over 90%, comes in the form of debt or equity, with debt being the dominant mechanism at 61%. According to the UN's Trade and Development Research on Sustainable Finance Trends, green bonds are one of the most important tools for scaling up climate finance. Today, green bonds make up the largest share of the sustainable finance market, accounting for 64% of total issuance. You'll note on the slide the different types of debt instruments within this breakdown of debt issuance. Issuance is broken down between sustainability-linked bonds, sustainable bonds, and green bonds. So let's unpack these a little bit more. Unlike green bonds, sustainability-linked bonds aren't tied to specific projects. Instead, they focus on a company's forward-looking commitment to stronger ESG performance. These are fixed income instruments where the terms of financing depend on how well the issuer meets the defined sustainability goals. These goals are measured through key performance indicators and sustainability performance targets. If the company achieves them, it can benefit from a lower coupon rate. This refers to the interest payment that a bond issuer agrees to make to the bondholder. In sustainability-linked bonds, the coupon rate can change. It may go down if sustainability targets are met, or go up if they are missed. Sustainability bonds are debt instruments designed to raise capital for a mix of green and social projects, things like renewable energy, affordable housing, or job creation. They follow standards such as the ICMA Sustainability Bond Guidelines, which are a set of voluntary process guidelines developed by the International Capital Market Association to promote integrity, transparency, and credibility in the sustainable bond market. For investors, these bonds offer a way to support responsible, impact-driven initiatives, and for issuers, they provide access to capital while also strengthening credibility and reputation. Then we have green bonds. These are also use of proceeds instruments, but focused exclusively on environmental projects. They have become the most widely used sustainable debt instrument, funding a range of activities from renewable energy to energy efficiency and sustainable transport. And then finally, we have climate bonds. Climate bonds are a subset of green bonds, but with stricter criteria. They focus specifically on projects that contribute directly to climate change mitigation or adaptation. When an organization issues a climate bond, the proceeds need to go into projects that actively contribute to tackling climate change. One of the main ways this happens is through climate mitigation projects and activities that reduce or prevent greenhouse gas emissions. Examples of climate mitigation projects include renewable energy projects. These focus on renewable energy sources to reduce reliance on fossil fuels, for example, solar or wind energy projects. Energy efficiency refers to projects that reduce energy use, and in doing so, cut both emissions and costs. This can include simple measures like efficient lighting or larger improvements in industrial processes that minimize wasted power. Sustainable transport refers to low emissions, accessible and efficient transport systems. This includes electric vehicles and low carbon public transport. Forestry and land use relates to the protection of forests, restoring degraded land, and adopting climate-smart agriculture, not only to reduce emissions, but also increase carbon absorption. And finally, waste management relates to minimizing environmental impact through recycling and reuse. This includes recycling, composting, and capturing methane from landfills to lower emissions from waste. Mitigation finance still accounts for the vast majority of global climate spending. In 2023, nearly $1.8 trillion, about 94% of all tracked climate finance was directed towards mitigation. Then when we talk about climate adaptation, we're talking about preparing for the impacts of climate change that are already happening and building resilience for the future. Adaptation projects protect communities, economies, and ecosystems from shocks like floods, droughts, and extreme heat. Let's look at some of the key areas for proceeds. First, water management. This is securing and managing water through defenses, storage, and treatment systems. With reoccurring droughts, like the Cape Town Day Zero crisis, investing in efficient irrigation systems, better water storage, and recycling wastewater is critical. Second, urban planning projects make cities livable under climate stress with resilient design and green spaces. South Africa's growing cities are highly vulnerable to flooding and heat waves. Adaptation measures include improving stormwater drainage in places like Durban and zoning that keeps housing and infrastructure out of high-risk floodplains. Then we have climate resilient infrastructure, and this relates to roads, bridges, rails, and the electricity grid, which face threats from extreme weather. These projects focus on stronger construction standards, smarter design, and resilience planning. And finally, we have agriculture and food security. And this relates to ensuring stable and resilient crops. Farmers are already experiencing shifting rainfall and rising temperatures. Climate-smart farming practices, drought-tolerant crops, early warning systems, and better storage can help protect food supplies. If you consider the breakdown of green bond issuance per sector, you will see that global issuance is heavily weighted towards climate. The bulk of issuance continues to go into the energy sector, largely funding renewable power and related infrastructure. Transport is the next largest share at 19%, supporting investments in sustainable mobility. Buildings follow at 18%, financing sustainable construction and energy-efficient real estate. Water, waste, and land make up 17%, and climate adaptation projects are only allocated 4%. Most climate finance flows to mitigation because these types of projects generate clear revenue streams and measurable carbon reductions. Adaptation projects like flood defenses or drought-resilient farming deliver essential benefits but are harder to monetize and measure. So they rely more on public or concessional finance. And this imbalance leaves adaptation underfunded, even though it is critical for vulnerable communities. Now we're going to take a closer look into equity funding. Earlier, I mentioned that equity investments make up 33% of climate finance. This section briefly looks at different equity investment mechanisms. On the slide are different types of equity investing instruments that would result in a portion of ownership. First, we have direct equity investments. Here, investors buy shares directly in renewable energy companies, clean tech firms, or climate-focused startups. This provides long-term capital growth while giving investors an ownership stake. Then we have public equity or listed stocks. This is when climate finance flows through the stock market, with investors buying shares of companies that are leading in low-carbon transitions. ESG and climate-themed exchange-traded funds also channel capital from retail and institutional investors. Examples include clean energy indices, low carbon funds, or transition funds. Then we have private equity and venture capital. Private equity firms typically back large scalable projects such as renewable energy projects or low carbon infrastructure. Venture capital, on the other hand, focuses on innovative startups and green technologies like advanced batteries or carbon capture. This type of capital is patient and risk tolerant, stepping in where commercial debt may be harder to access. And finally, we have blended equity structures, which we have already touched on earlier in this presentation. The attribution to equity instruments can be difficult in both listed and private equity, as companies often have mixed activities, making it hard to decide what portion qualifies as climate finance. Data is limited, and the lack of universal standards or taxonomies for equity investments is also challenging and means institutions apply different criteria, leading to inconsistent reporting. But this graph gives an indication of predominant themes in the listed equity space. This graph is from Morningstar, and it shows how global thematic funds are invested. Thematic funds are listed investment funds that focus on a specific long-term theme, idea, or trend, rather than just a sector or geographic region. They allow investors to target capital towards structural shifts in the economy or society. From the chart, you can see that at the end of June 2024, energy transition ranked as the second most popular global theme, with $67 in assets under management. This type of thematic investment fund focuses specifically on companies, projects, or assets driving the global shift from fossil fuels to low carbon and renewable energy systems. Despite the growth in climate finance, there are still major barriers preventing it from reaching levels where it needs to be. Globally, the scale of climate finance we need is massive. To stay on track with the 1.5 degree target, funding must increase at least fivefold to about $7.5 trillion every year through to 2030, and more than $8.8 trillion annually from 2031 to 2050. Market and structural issues limit how capital flows, while regulatory and policy frameworks are often too fragmented or slow to provide investor confidence. Risk perception remains high, especially in emerging markets, and gaps in information and transparency make it difficult for investors to assess opportunities. For South Africa, these global challenges are deeply familiar. Our energy transition is capital intensive, yet investors often cite the same barriers here: policy uncertainty, risk premiums, and limited transparency all drive up the cost of capital. So the challenge is twofold: scaling global finance to meet the 1.5-degree pathway, while addressing these barriers locally to ensure South Africa can mobilize its fair share of global climate finance. Despite the challenges, I want to close off my section of this webinar by highlighting the range of benefits of climate finance from an issuer's perspective. First, it helps meet climate targets. Net zero commitments and global agreements like the Paris Agreement require massive investment in low carbon solutions. For South Africa, this is also important as it has pledged emissions cuts in its nationally determined contribution, and climate finance is key to unlocking the capital needed to stay on target. Climate finance also improves access to green capital. Issuing green bonds or sustainability-linked loans taps into global demand for sustainable investments and broadens the investor base. In South Africa, we've already seen local banks and corporates issuing green bonds that attracts both domestic and international investors eager to fund the transition. Climate finance instruments can also unlock capital at preferential rates. Climate finance strengthens reputation and trust. Companies positioned as climate leaders enhance their brand, attract global partners, and can appeal to customers. For South African firms looking to remain competitive in export markets, especially with new trade measures like the EU's carbon border tax, climate leadership is becoming a business imperative. Climate finance ensures risk and strategy alignment. Directing capital into climate-smart projects reduces operational risks, from droughts affecting agriculture to floods damaging urban infrastructure. For South African businesses, investing in resilience means protecting both supply chains and communities in a country already feeling the impacts of climate change. And finally, one of the key benefits is policy alignment and supportive incentives. Governments play a crucial role by creating an environment that encourages businesses to invest in green projects through the provision of supportive measures such as tax incentives. At this point, I'll hand over to Sunal, who will share more detail on how this works in practice. Over to you, Sunal.
Thanks, Lisa. Good afternoon. So, as Lisa mentioned, for this discussion, I'll be focusing on the 12L energy efficiency tax incentive as a key mechanism of climate finance, central to South Africa's transition to lower carbon economy. So we will be looking at why it matters, how it works, and the practical steps organizations can take to benefit from it. By the end of the session, my aim is that you'll have a clear understanding of how the 12L tax incentive mechanism can be leveraged both to reduce energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions, as well as delivering financial and strategic benefits to your organization. So the Section 12L tax incentive was introduced in South Africa through the Income Tax Act as part of the country's broader commitment to energy efficiency, emissions reductions, and sustainable economic growth. It forms part of the National Energy Efficiency Strategy, and it aligns with South Africa's climate change and energy security goals. Looking at some of the key drivers behind its establishment, the first one being energy security concerns. So South Africa has long faced electricity supply constraints with Eskom's limited capacity and load shedding threatening economic stability. So improving energy efficiency at scale was seen as one of the fastest, lowest cost ways to reduce pressure on the grid while supporting economic activity. So also a pressing driver was climate change. So South Africa is committed to reducing greenhouse gas emissions under international agreements, so most recently the Paris Agreement, and incentivizing private sector energy efficiency projects provided a practical market-based tool to help meet emission reduction targets. So alongside global commitments, businesses also faced pressure to remain competitive. So energy efficiency industries like mining, manufacturing, commercial sectors, they face rising electricity and fuel costs. So by rewarding measurable efficiency improvements, 12L helps businesses to lower their operational costs, boosting competitiveness in global markets. And then to stay competitive, companies need capital, which is where investment mobilization came in. And the incentive was designed to unlock private capital for efficiency projects, which might otherwise be delayed due to high upfront costs. So by monetizing energy savings through tax deductions, it created a financial case for businesses to invest in efficiency technologies. So 12L was not just about tax relief, it was about driving behavioral change in how businesses consume energy, encouraging a shift towards sustainable, efficient, and low carbon operations that ultimately benefit the economy, the environment, and energy security. So what is the Section 12L incentive? It's the South African government scheme that allows businesses to claim a tax deduction based on verified energy savings from energy efficiency measures being implemented and helping reduce both energy cost and carbon emissions. So it's basically a government reward that lets businesses pay less tax if they can prove that they saved energy. So it offers reductions for energy efficiency in order to combat climate change and address South Africa's energy supply security. It's an opportunity for businesses to increase profits through reduced energy costs and tax reductions. And the incentive is available to any profitable commercial business or trading entity. It applies to all sectors, industrial, commercial, agricultural, mining, manufacturing, etc., and no limits to the number of claims or the sizes of individual claims. So the tax deduction is calculated at 95 cents per kilowatt hour or kilowatt hour equivalent energy saved, with energy saved being defined as the difference between the actual energy used during an activity and the energy that would have been used if the energy saving measure had not been implemented. So it's applicable to projects that result in the same production volumes by using less energy, or projects that result in higher production volumes, so more product being produced while using the same amount of energy. So in essence, an increased product yield per unit energy. And the incentive applies to consecutive 12-month period or of verified energy savings. So let's just take a step back and look at the evolution of the 12L tax incentive. So South Africa's National Energy Efficiency Strategy first launched in 2005 and then revised in 2008. And it made it clear that South Africa needed fiscal incentives to drive energy savings at scale. That is when the groundwork for the 12L started. So in 2009, the Income Tax Act was amended to introduce Section 12L. And this created the legal framework for an energy efficiency tax incentive. But at this stage, it was just a law on paper and was still needed regulations, standards, and processes before anyone could actually claim it. So during that time, there were also some amendments and substitutions. And then finally in 2013, the regulations were finally published. These regulations spelled out exactly how energy efficiency savings had to be measured, verified, and certified, and giving the incentive its operational backbone. Then Section 12L became operational for the first time. Taxpayers could then claim a deduction for verified energy efficiency savings. The initial rate was 45 cents per kilowatt hour saved, and the amendment in 2015, effective from 1st of April 2015, increased this allowance, enabling businesses to claim a tax incentive at a rate of 95 cents per kilowatt hour or kilowatt hour equivalent saved. So this change made the incentive far more attractive and gave businesses a stronger financial reason to invest in energy efficiency projects. And then between 2016 and 2019 is when the incentive gained real traction. We started seeing companies across manufacturing, mining, and commercial sectors actively participating and submitting projects for certification. The initial sunset clause in the 2013 regulations was the end of 2019. And then in February 2019, the implementation period was extended. So due to a strong demand and the fact that it aligned with South Africa's climate and energy goals, National Treasury granted an extension by 3 years to the 31st of December 2022. Then in February 2022, a further extension to the implementation period by 3 more years came into effect until 31st of December 2025. These extensions recognize the importance of using available energy efficiently amid a period of constrained power supply, and it was aligned to the first phase of the South African carbon tax. Then in 2024, government reaffirmed its commitment to incentivizing energy efficiency and the broader green transition, and a second extension was announced on 14 August 2025, and this time taking the Section 12L through all the way to 31st of December 2030. So the current expiry date, as it stands today, is scheduled to run until the end of December 2030, unless, of course, government extends it again in the future. So these repeated extensions demonstrates to us that 12L has proven to be a powerful tool and mechanism driving measurable energy savings, unlocking private investment, and supporting South Africa's energy security and climate goals. So when one looks into 12L, a lot of role players pop up, and it could be overwhelming to understand where they all fit in. So we can have a quick look at the main role players and what their roles are in the whole process. So if we start with National Treasury, Treasury is responsible for fiscal policy, so they design tax incentives like Section 12L and the rules under the Income Tax Act of 1962. Treasury determines how long the incentive will run, what the deduction rate is, so currently it's 95 cents per kilowatt hour saved, and whether it gets extended as we've seen with the current extension to 2030. So in short, Treasury sets the framework. Then next is SARS, the South African Revenue Service. So SARS administers and enforces the tax law. They publish interpretation notes such as IN 95, which then guide us on how 12L deductions are applied. And importantly, they review the claims that taxpayers submit in their tax returns. So SARS is the authority that ultimately grants or denies your deduction. And even if everything else is in place, without SARS's approval, you won't receive your benefit. So looking at SANEDI, the South African National Energy Development Institute. So SANEDI was tasked with the responsibility of adjudicating, evaluating, and supporting these 12L tax incentive applications. So to fulfill this duty, the Institute has appointed a review panel consisting of independent specialists who bring together a depth of experience and subject matter expertise to evaluate the project submissions. SANEDI certifies the energy efficiency savings. They receive measurement and verification reports from accredited professionals, and then after evaluation, they issue the official 12L energy efficiency savings certificate. So without SANEDI certificate, SARS will not accept a claim, and SANEDI essentially acts as the gatekeeper between the technical verification and the tax administration. Then the next acronym that comes up is SANAS, the South African National Accreditation System. So SANAS accredits the measurement and verification professionals and bodies. They ensure that the work is carried out accurately, competently, independent, and in line with national standards. So only SANAS accredited entities can produce a measurement and verification report that SANEDI will accept. So no accreditation, and there will be no valid report. Moving on to SABS, the South African Bureau of Standards. So SABS is responsible for publishing and maintaining the standards, which in this case is the SANS 50010. This is the official rulebook that measurement and verification of energy savings. So the measurement and verification bodies would use the SANS 50010 as their methodology. And without this standard, there would be no consistent way to measure and report on savings. And then finally, the last one left is the DMRE, the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy. They provide an overarching energy policy direction. They oversee SANEDI and they make sure that incentives like 12L align with broader energy efficiency and climate goals. So while they don't process claims directly, they ensure that the Section 12L fits into South Africa's long-term energy and climate strategies. So just to summarize the process flow, so we can see how it all links together. So National Treasury created the incentive under the Income Tax Act. SABS publishes the standards, the SANS 50010, and then SANAS accredits the measurement and verification professionals to apply that standard, and the accredited measurement and verification body then verifies the savings and prepares a report that is then submitted to SANEDI that will review the report and issue the savings certificate. The taxpayer then submits the certificate to SARS with their tax return. SARS will review it and if everything checks out, grants the deduction. And then throughout all of this, the DMRE provides policy oversight to ensure alignment with national goals. So each body from Treasury all the way to DMRE plays a critical role in and interconnected role in making 12L function. So knowing who does what helps one navigate the process effectively and make it a bit less confronting. So now that we've looked at what 12L tax incentive is and the type of projects that incentive applies to and the key role players, let's look at practically how does a company actually go about accessing this tax incentive. So there's a clear step-by-step process to follow, and I'm going to walk you through it. The first step is obviously to identify a potential project that will result in energy savings and that can potentially qualify for the 12L incentive. Then it is important to register the project. So this happens through an online portal where you'll complete an online registration form to initiate the process. And then next you'll need to appoint a SANAS accredited measurement and verification body. The reason for this is because the regulations require that your energy savings be independently measured and verified. These accredited professionals compile the energy consumption reports that are submitted to SANEDI, and it's important to note that the cost of these measurement and verification services are for the applicant's own account. So then before any implementing of energy saving measures can take place, a baseline needs to be established first. So the baseline is defined according to the SANS 50010 standard that I just mentioned, and the official measurement and verification, which is the official measurement and verification standard, and it represents the energy consumption over a consecutive 12-month period prior to the implementation of the saving measures. The measurements and verification body then conducts a control study and prepares a baseline report. The report must then be submitted to SANEDI for approval before the project can move forward. So once SANEDI has approved the baseline, the organization takes responsibility for implementing the energy saving measures and the energy efficiency upgrades or initiatives. If it is rejected by the review panel, the baseline establishment process needs to be revisited. So after the energy efficiency project has now been implemented for a 12 consecutive month period, the next step is the verification. So the accredited measurement and verification body will now measure your actual energy performance and compare it to the approved baseline, and the results are compiled into an MNV report showing the verified savings for the assessment year, and this report is then submitted online for SANEDI's review again. And then finally, SANEDI's review panel will assess your submission. If the project meets all the specified criteria, SANEDI will endorse the verified savings and issue you with an energy efficiency certificate. This certificate is then submitted to SARS as part of your tax return, and with that, the taxpayer can deduct the allowance from taxable income for the assessment year. So this was looking at an overview of one, can mostly say the administrative process. So looking a bit more in detail at how the actual energy savings are being determined. So once you've identified the project that we just discussed, and more specifically the energy saving measure that will be implemented, you need to determine the measurement and verification boundary, which is a very important step in establishing the baseline. So the two options currently, you can do a whole facility approach. So the whole facility approach look at the entire site's energy consumption before and after the energy efficiency intervention. So instead of isolating a single piece of equipment, it measures savings across the whole operation. For example, an entire mine or a factory or a commercial building. And this method relies on statistical or regression models to account for variables such as production levels, weather conditions, or occupancy. Then this type of whole facility approach is best suited for large, complex facilities where multiple systems interact. So it captures the cumulative effect of several small improvements. It simplifies measurement when individual retrofits are hard to isolate. But the challenges with this approach is it requires high quality, consistent data, and the statistical modeling must be robust to prove that the savings are real and not just operational changes. Then the second approach that one can use is the retrofit approach. So this approach would focus on a specific system or process or a piece of equipment that has been upgraded. So for example, replacing an old boiler or upgrading lighting to LEDs or installing a new HVAC system. Here the baseline energy use of that system is compared against the post-retrofit performance, so while holding external variables constant. And this approach is mostly used, or it's best for discrete, well-defined projects where the savings can be easily measured. It provides more direct attribution of savings to the intervention, and it's often easier to explain and document for SANEDI and SARS. The challenge, however, is that it doesn't account for system-wide interactions, so only the retrofitted component. And then if you have multiple retrofits, it may require multiple M&V studies. So in summary, the whole facility approach is a broad view and is ideal for large complex sites with multiple interacting energy systems. And the retrofit approach is for a narrow focus and ideal for targeted upgrades where savings are easy to isolate and measure. So both these approaches are recognized by SANS 50010 and can be used for Section 12L claims. The choice depends on the project scope and the complexity and the data availability. So after the M&V boundary has now been established, the measurement and verification period should be determined. So the measurement and verification period should be a period representative of a full operational cycle and a period as close as possible to before the energy saving measure will be implemented. So once that is established, the data gathering can start. And once all the data has been acquired, the baseline consumption or baseline energy consumption can be developed or established based on the SANS 50010 standard. And then once the sign-off from the SANS accredited M&V body is obtained, the baseline report is then submitted to SANEDI for approval. So only then can the energy saving measure be implemented. So then after implementation, the very important step is to make sure that the appropriate measurement equipment is installed if it's not already in place. So for a 12-month period, the energy consumption is measured and monitored. The data is gathered for that 12-month period and the energy savings determined against the baseline. And then a draft performance assessment report is drawn up, and after sign-off from the SANS accredited M&V body, it is submitted to SANEDI for approval. And as previously stated, if the project meets all the specified criteria, SANEDI will endorse the verified savings and issue an energy efficiency tax certificate. Okay, so now that we understand the process a little bit better, and the different sort of M&V approaches, if we just look at a practical example of how the monetary savings are actually calculated, so what are the benefits, what does one get out of it in terms of the tax benefits, so under Section 12L. So business as usual let's say the business has a net profit of 2 million Rand with a marginal tax rate of 28%, then the tax payable is 560,000. Now, if your energy savings measurements are implemented and you register it under 12L and it's successful, and your verified energy savings is 1 million kilowatt hours, with the incentive rate being 95 cents per kilowatt hour, your tax incentive amount would be 950,000 Rand. So then your tax payable, once if you've applied for the 12L tax incentive, would now be 2 million minus the 950. So it would be 1,050,000 times your tax rate, and that would be 294,000. So in essence, the money saved from having a 12L project would be 266,000. But the total savings would also be, so it's the 266,000 plus the money that you'll save from all the energy bills, because you have implemented the energy efficiency, which means you use less energy as well. So those are the two things also to take into consideration, not just the money that's saved from tax deduction, but also the amount saved from actual energy savings. So just looking at projects that qualify, so typical projects that qualify for this incentive, it would be greenfields projects where the baseline are established using industry comparative. So if you don't have you can't measure it at your own plant, you can look at industry comparatives and establish a baseline that way. Energy conversion efficiency improvements, also green building projects that aim for net zero certification levels. They can also look at energy conservation projects that maintain the same output levels. And then route optimization projects for logistics and transport industry, including aviation, and also waste heat recovery and underutilized energy use from industrial processes. Also cogeneration projects with high energy conversion efficiencies. So projects that don't qualify, so it's important that there are a few that don't qualify to claim 12L incentive. It's renewable energy projects. We'll get to another tax incentive at the end that might help with renewable energy projects, but for 12L, generally renewable energy projects are not included, but unless they meet specific conditions. So for example, a captive power plant can qualify only if they demonstrate an energy conversion efficiency above 35% for the assessment year. And then projects with insufficient or unverifiable baseline data also won't qualify for 12L, and interventions that reduce the output or compromise efficiency will also not qualify for 12L deduction. So what should businesses keep in mind when thinking about pursuing a 12L claim? So Section 12L will significantly boost return on investment on energy efficiency projects. The business already saved money from reduced electricity consumption, and the tax incentive provides an additional layer of financial return. But businesses also need to look at return on investment after accounting for all the related costs. That includes the measurement, the fees for the measurement and verification. So since they are compulsory and must be done by a SANA's accredited professional, it could become quite pricey, so it needs to be taken into consideration. And then also the implementation cost of the energy efficiency intervention itself, whether it's new equipment, upgrades, or a system integration. So only once you factored in these costs can you see the true return on investment for the project. Then it is important to consider timelines, the time it takes to complete the verification and secure the tax benefit. So to qualify, projects must follow the Section 12L process right from the start, including baseline approval, and delays in appointing a measurement and verification body or registering with SANEDI can push timelines back. Businesses should also consider aligning their project timelines with both operational schedules and tax submission deadlines. Then another important factor, businesses must consider their technical capacity to maintain consistent and verifiable energy savings over time. So Section 12L doesn't just reward installing a new piece of equipment, it rewards the measurable sustained performance of this improvement. So that means businesses need the right systems, skills, and resources in place to track energy usage continuously. And without ongoing monitoring and technical oversight, the savings may drop off, or worse, they may become difficult to verify during the measurement and verification process. So in general, the incentive works best for medium to large projects where the tax benefit outweighs the admin and measurement and verification costs. So looking at a few key benefits of Section 12L, the financial benefits, if we firstly look at those, it's a direct tax saving. So the tax deduction is 95 cents for every verified kilowatt hour saved, and this directly reduces a company's taxable income. It improves the return on investment for energy efficiency projects, and importantly, the tax savings can free up capital that can then be reinvested into operations, growth opportunities, or even further efficiency upgrades. If we look at operational benefits, reducing the energy consumption directly lowers your electricity bills, which is especially valuable in the energy intensive sectors. And on top of that, efficiency interventions often lead to better processes, improved equipment reliability, and even higher productivity across the business. So the benefits aren't only financial, they're embedded in the way the company runs every day. Then the last two, the environmental and strategic benefits. Energy efficiency leads to a smaller carbon footprint and reduced energy-related emissions. This supports a company's ESG reporting and sustainability commitments, and lower energy costs improves a company's competitiveness because the product costs can come down. And also Section 12L aligns with South Africa's broader climate change goals and national energy saving strategy. And beyond compliance, it helps enhance the corporate reputation with customers, investors, and even regulators who increasingly expect businesses to show measurable action on sustainability. So before we look at some case studies of some success stories, it's also important to recognize that while Section 12L offers great benefits, there are also challenges to be mindful of. So let's look at some of the challenges that businesses need to be aware of and some best practices that can help the business get the most out of the incentive. So firstly, the process can be complex. The measurement and verification requirements are highly technical and need to be followed precisely. Second, there's a cost of the audits and verification, and these are essential for compliance but can add to project expenses. And then thirdly, there's still a limited awareness, so many businesses either don't know about Section 12L or they underestimate what it takes to claim successfully. And then how this can be overcome. If one plans early, so integrate the Section 12L requirements into the design of your efficiency project from the very beginning. If you work with accredited experts, so experienced M&V specialists will help ensure compliance and reduce the risk of delays or rejections. And then if you align your tax planning with capital expenditure cycles, this ensures you maximize both the financial and tax benefits when the project go live. So according to the SANEDI site, where projects are registered, since the start of the 12L incentive, there has already been 386 projects registered, around 34,540 gigawatt hours of energy savings, and 29.3 billion in tax relief. So it has I would say, quite a lot of success. Just some charts showing also the split among the sectors that are mostly benefiting from this and the energy carriers. So it seems like manufacturing and also mining is taking up most of those projects and benefiting from the 12L incentive. And then also on the right, you can see the mix of in general, a mix of non-renewable energy carriers, and 12% of the projects is for grid electricity. So if we just look at a few case studies, I have about 3 here just to show some success stories. So Woolworths is one of them. Their 12L energy efficiency project. So like I mentioned, first one needs to identify your energy saving measures, and they have quite a few interventions. So with all these interventions, they also, I think they would make use of the whole facility approach. But I think we all, if we've been to Woolies, we remember the time they rolled out those clear acrylic door refrigeration equipment. So that will improve the cold chain and reduce the energy consumption. So that was one of the energy saving measures that they submitted for their 12L energy efficiency project. They also used recycled waste heat, used automated load controls, upgraded their lighting to more efficient lighting, etc. And all their energy savings was from electricity, so less electricity used. And you can see there the savings is, so 10% savings since the financial year of 2015, about 20 million kilowatt hours of energy saved, 35 million worth of electricity saved, and 19,000 tons of carbon dioxide saved, and then over 100 million estimated investment costs that resulted from this 12L project that they submitted. Then another one is Algoa Brick. So their facility in Port Elizabeth, and they manufacture and supply clay-fired bricks to the Nelson Mandela Bay Metro. And their energy saving measures that they employed was a burner system upgrade, some variable speed drive technology and exhaust fans, and waste heat recovery. And their key achievements, they've had about 10% reduction in their energy consumption, which is about 9 million kilowatt hours. And they've also saved 1,500 tons of greenhouse gas emissions. And then the last one we can look at is the Golden Arrow bus service. So they focused on improving the fuel efficiency of its bus fleet and continuously introducing new and more fuel efficient buses into their fleet. And then these modern buses are used more frequently than the older, less efficient buses, and also increasing fuel efficiency by optimizing maintenance practices and conducting driver training. So the modern buses have optimized design as well that use lightweight components to reduce the fuel consumption per kilometer, and also have optimized passenger carrying capacity. So their key achievements also there is about 6 million kilowatt hours or 6.7 million kilowatt hours, 1.8 million money saved, 2,000 tons of greenhouse gas emissions mitigated. So yeah, these are three quite successful 12L stories. I would just like to look at a few. So we've covered 12L, but I said that 12L you can't always use, or renewable energy doesn't qualify for 12L. So I just would like to briefly go through some other incentives that are also out there. So Section 11D is a research and development tax incentive, and it's run by the Department of Science and Technology. So to promote scientific and technological advancements through innovation, and this helps companies to be more competitive in local and global markets. So the R&D is defined as the development of new products, processes, services, materials, or software, or the improvement of existing products, processes, services, materials, or software. So funding is in the form of a tax deduction for costs incurred in research and development, and the sectors that are excluded from this is the oil and gas exploration, financial instruments, and products. So the benefit from this is that the incentive is a tax deduction of 150% of the qualifying R&D costs incurred in South Africa, and the benefit is equivalent to a net 40% tax saving on eligible R&D expenditure. And the requirements for this incentive, so a company must apply for support before the R&D costs are incurred, and then it needs to submit a pre-approval application form to the Department of Science and Technology, which manages the DST manages the scheme. And once the request has been approved, the company will need to submit an annual progress report, and then the eligible R&D expenditure is then claimed in the company's tax return. So a company that is developing and or implementing an energy efficient or renewable energy product or process into their businesses may be eligible for R&D tax incentive. Then the cost to this. The only cost to access this incentive is the cost incurred in completing the application. So the application form is relatively simple, but the criteria to secure the incentive are complex, and there is a slow turnaround time, and this means it is advisable to use a consultant. So the other two that I just like to mention quickly is 12B. It allows accelerated depreciation on renewable energy assets like solar, wind, and biomass. And then there was also, for a brief period from 2023 to the start of 2025, was a Section 12BA, which now has expired, but it provided a temporary 125% upfront deduction for renewable energy projects. So yeah, I just wanted to mention those ones that are linked to climate change, so not just the 12L, but there are some other options as well. And then I guess as we wrap up this session, I just included, when we share the slides, some more information on those tax incentives. But as we wrap up the session, I would just like you to answer 2 poll questions. So before today's webinar, had you heard of Section 12L incentive before? And do you think Section 12L could be useful to your organization? Knowing what you know now, all the benefits, all the challenges, is it something that you would be interested in or think that your company can actually benefit from? Then just to conclude, so by reducing energy consumption, you already cut operating costs, but with Section 12L, those verified savings are converted into a tax deduction with 95 cents per kilowatt hour. So that means every efficiency improvement directly translates into a real financial return. So for many companies, this incentive has shortened payback periods, freed up capital for reinvestment, and even unlocked projects that would never have gone ahead without the tax benefit. So as well as significantly enabled them to reduce their carbon footprint and improve their ESG reporting and sustainability targets. So the process does require planning, data, and accredited expertise, but when it's approached strategically, the benefits can be significant. So for businesses, I guess the message is simple. Section 12L turns energy efficiency into both a financial advantage and a strategic driver of growth and resilience. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Sonal, and thank you, Lisa, for the very insightful presentation that you gave today. I do hope that everyone has learned a bit more about climate finance today and you feel better equipped in understanding the climate finance instruments that are available to your organization in your climate change journey. If you have any questions or would like to find out more about the topics that were discussed today, do feel free to contact us directly after the webinar, and a Six Capitals team member will get back to you as soon as possible. So once again, I'd like you for attending today's webinar, and I wish you a great day further. Thanks, everyone.